So, again, welcome to the webinar. We started early because we have so many questions, but also to clarify about Sarepta's NDA submission. Their submission did not include clinical data because it was submitted under the accelerated approval pathway. This is the pathway that FDA instituted to really try to drive forward early approvals of drugs, and it is based on a surrogate endpoint, which is a marker, in our case dystrophin, that is not a measure of clinical benefit, but it supports clinical benefit. So with that, I'm going to turn this over, and Doug, I hope you're on the line, and I'm going to begin the series of questions. So the change from baseline that we understand in terms of dystrophin expression from it, yes?
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah?
As we discussed, if it's okay, if Doug has a moment to share some thoughts at the top, so that we.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, Kaylin. Siobhan, that would be terrific.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, over to you. So Doug, you're on.
Thank you very much. So I am Doug Ingram. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Sarepta. I have with me a number of individuals in the room, including but not limited to our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Gilmore O'Neill, who can help if there are technical questions that need answered as well. So let me give you some context. First, I do want to thank PPMD and Pat Furlong. I do want to thank you for providing us with a forum for this golodirsen update, and I want to thank all of the families on this call for participating today. Now, the official name of golodirsen is, today it's Vyondys 53, so I'm going to try to use the name Vyondys for the remainder of this call. I might occasionally err and go back to golodirsen, but Vyondys and golodirsen are the same thing. Vyondys is a PMO. It's a thing called a morpholino oligomer, and it's intended to induce exon skipping and generate truncated but functional dystrophin in those Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients who are amenable to skipping exon 53. I want to start all of this by telling all of the families living with Duchenne muscular dystrophy how deeply sorry I am for our failure to obtain an approval for Vyondys 53 on Monday. We had all expected an approval, and we were shocked to have not received one. And while it is a disappointment to all of the dedicated employees at Sarepta who have been working so diligently to make Vyondys available to this community, I am well aware that it is far more devastating to those families living with exon 53 amenable mutations and for those patients who are being irreparably damaged as they await new therapy. So again, I am truly, truly sorry for the outcome of Monday. With that, I would like to explain what happened to the best that I can. Commencing in February of 2018, Sarepta opened a dialogue with the Neurology Division of the FDA about the accelerated approval pathway for Vyondys. So to remind you, we have an ongoing placebo-controlled trial called ESSENCE. It involves Vyondys. It also involves another therapy called casimersen, which is for exon 45 amenable patients. The goal of the accelerated approval pathway is to obtain an approval based on dystrophin production reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit, and then to use the ESSENCE trial as the post-approval trial to confirm the functional benefits that are predicted by increases in dystrophin. The value of the accelerated approval pathway is that in circumstances like this, where there is a biomarker that is reasonably likely to lead to clinical benefit, it speeds medicines that confer those clinical benefits to patients with serious life-threatening diseases who would otherwise be greatly harmed, or even worse, if they had to await the confirmation of functional benefits in a much longer trial. Based on positive feedback from the division, Sarepta submitted its file in late 2018. That file included data from our study, which is called 4053-101, which assessed the safety, the tolerability, the pharmacokinetics, and dystrophin expression in 25 exon 53 amenable boys. As this submission was an accelerated approval application on dystrophin production, no analysis was included on the functional endpoints, as this will come from ESSENCE as a post-approval commitment. The division accepted the submission for filing in early 2019, and it commenced its review. The review went extremely well throughout, and the working relationship with the division has been stellar. The deadline for the review, what is called the PDUFA date, was last Monday, August 19th. Our final meeting with the division was the preceding Wednesday. By last Wednesday, all remaining issues had, to our knowledge, been resolved, and we had concluded all negotiations with the division regarding the label, regarding post-marketing commitments for when Vyondys is approved, and even had concluded the press release with the agency announcing the approval. As you can imagine, therefore, we were surprised on Monday when we received the complete response letter from the FDA. As Pat noted, a complete response letter, or what is sometimes called a CRL, is a letter that indicates that at least at this time the FDA is not prepared to approve the therapy. In the letter, the Office of New Drugs raised two issues that they state make the risk-benefit not supportive of approval. They note first that ports will sometimes be used with Vyondys, and as ports are occasionally associated with infections, this is a safety issue from their perspective. And they raised, secondly, the potential for risks of renal toxicity. There were no signals of renal toxicity in the clinical trials. However, the FDA believes there is a risk from non-clinical studies in mice that indicated a theoretical risk of toxicity, albeit at doses that were an order of magnitude higher than used in the human clinical trials or proposed for approval. Neither of these issues were raised during the review. Indeed, no major issues remained for discussion in either our mid-cycle division meeting or our late-cycle division meeting. Hence, at this point, it is difficult to fully describe the FDA's perspective on these items, and there will likely today be many questions you have that at this point I will be unable to answer until we engage further with the FDA. Our next step is to ask for a formal meeting with the division to better understand their concerns and to discuss strategies to address them. We will do that and assume that we can get a meeting with the division in the coming 2 months. Once we have had further dialogue with the division, we will know better what opportunities we have to address those concerns and, if possible, get the accelerated approval filing back on track. In the interim, Essence obviously continues unhindered. If we are able to obtain an accelerated approval, Essence will act as the post-approval confirmatory trial. If we are unable to obtain an accelerated approval, Essence will be the mechanism to obtain an approval and bring Vyondys to the community. Essence will likely not be completed and read out until 2023 or even 2024. We recognize that this is an appallingly long time for families to wait for this therapy, so we will work tirelessly and with a sense of urgency in an effort to get this program back on track for an accelerated approval, if that is possible. In summary, please know that we understand our obligation to you. We understand the importance of this effort to this community, and we understand the irreparable harm that is caused by delay. We won't give up, and we will work as fast as possible in an effort to address the concerns that have been raised by the agency. And with that, I think, Pat, if you agree, we are prepared to answer some questions, although as I've noted before, two things. One, there are probably many questions that I simply don't have answers to today, but hopefully we'll have answers to in the near term. And secondly, of course, it won't surprise you, I can't answer non-public related questions if any of those questions arise. And with that.
Yes, and thank you, Doug, for that intro. That was much appreciated, I'm sure, by the community. And like you, the year 2024 seems forever away, and certainly when you're looking at a timeline for Duchenne, it is forever away because every moment matters. So I'm going to skip down, first of all, to the CRL. I was going to talk about data first, but I know the submission did not include data, and I'll come back to those questions. So in the interest of time, you know, there is interest in the CRL itself, because I am certain that there was likely a lot of information in the CRL that you aren't releasing or that you have to think about going forward. So I guess one of my first questions is, in terms of the CRL, would you or will you ever consider releasing that CRL and being perfectly transparent about all of the information that was contained within it?
So, first of all, Pat, I understand and heard that it's difficult to hear me. I apologize. You'll know if you're in the room right now, I'm actually yelling into the speaker, so hopefully people can hear me now. But so let me answer that. So these complete response letters are not public. They're non-public letters between the agencies and sponsors. I am not comfortable making the complete response letter public for the simple reason that I think it might look disrespectful to the agency as we are working through these issues. I can tell you, though, broadly, I have described the essence of the letter, that there, other than additional verbiage, the basis for the complete response is exactly as I have said, or as faithfully as I can summarize, which is the agency's perspective is that the risk-benefit isn't sufficient to justify the approval of the therapy right now. And on the safety side, the basis for that is twofold. One, an understanding that as would be the case in ports generally, that there are risks associated with infections in ports. And secondly, that while we never saw any indication of renal toxicity in our clinical trials, there was indications of renal toxicity in mouse models and preclinical models, albeit at a dose that was 10 times higher than we're using in human beings today. That is the basis for the CRM.
Okay, thank you. So within the study itself, Doug, did you have or did you see infections in the port? And as you know, the community is the one that drove the use of the port and requested the use of the port based on the veins that seem to roll and have real trouble accessing on young men with Duchenne. So we fought for this port, and I guess what my question is here, are you seeing infections in the port, and do you think your compound exacerbates or increases the risk of infections in the port?
So first of all, to the best of my knowledge, we actually have yet to see any port-related infections in connection with our Vyondys trials, but the agency's point is that eventually there will be infections that are associated with ports, as that is commonly the case associated with the placement of ports. There is nothing about the medicine itself that is increasing infection-related issues associated with ports, and I believe the agency actually, states that as much as that in the CRL itself. But I think their general point is that ports are associated with infections, that but for an infusion with the therapy, there wouldn't be a port, and therefore there wouldn't be infection, so they consider it, in essence, therapy-related.
All right, thank you. And during the study itself, have you seen any indications or any SAEs that have been reported that are related to any renal toxicity or any renal concerns?
We have not, no.
So it seems surprising for the FDA to suddenly raise these concerns if they haven't raised them prior to this. And so it is concerning to all of us. Why now, sort of? In terms of the data, in terms of the functional data, and let's go back to that, there is reported out a mean change from baseline of 0.095 to 0.19. Is that accurate?
That's right. That's accurate.
Okay. And when you're looking at the functional data, and you're talking about the ESSENCE study and the completion of the ESSENCE study, is that at the time that you're going to be reviewing or analyzing the functional data? Is there any plan for an interim analysis of the functional data from the ESSENCE study or from some of the sub-studies you're conducting?
There are no current plans for an interim analysis associated with the ESSENCE study. One of the reasons we wouldn't do an interim analysis, particularly as we're using ESSENCE as our confirmatory trial for accelerated approval, is that you take a hit to statistical to stats if you do it. So actually, to do interim analysis would actually require that we would have an even longer study with even more patients. So it wouldn't seem to be the best answer for patients to do that.
And Doug, in light of this decision by the FDA, are you considering opening additional studies, for instance, for people who are no longer walking or for adults over the age of 18?
Yeah, that is an excellent question that we don't have answers to yet. One of the questions that people obviously are very concerned about is the opportunity to be in trials for non-ambulatory patients. This has been, I'm well aware, a significant problem historically with clinical trials. We hadn't had a trial for non-ambulatory patients with golodirsen or Vyondys, and frankly, the fastest approach was to get the therapy approved and to look at a trial post-approval. In the event that we are unable to get this back on track or to address the issues raised by the agency, we will have to reconsider that issue and figure out a pathway for a clinical trial for non-ambulatory patients. So it is it's such new news that we don't have a good answer for it yet, but it's something we're already thinking about.
Well, I thank you for that. And you know, to date, most of the trials really end at the age of 18. So there's a lot of adults that would really want to participate and certainly cannot wait until 2024 for a therapy that can modify disease progression. So I think having that on your radar and perhaps updating us as you think through what could happen next in your interactions with the agency. There also have been a lot of questions. You have on your website a policy around compassionate use or right to try. Can you talk to us about that policy, and under these circumstances, would you consider revising or reviewing that policy and opening it up and maybe consider some of the right to try opportunities or certainly the expanded access programs?
Hi, Pat. I think, you know, that's something that we would have to consider over time. The compassionate use policy is available for people to read on the website right now. And they can see right now there is not an active compassionate use policy to access through Sarepta for Sarepta therapies. We've always had the stance that building, you know, placebo-controlled trials and trying to bring therapies to large portions of the population is the preference for the company, and that's where a lot of our energy and resources are placed.
Yeah, thank you for that. We certainly understand that, but in light of such disappointments as we have today, waiting, as we all know, with the timeline of the progression of Duchenne is really a very difficult position to be in as patients and families. So now I want to switch gears a little bit to the families participating in the sub-studies that are really recording their videos of children and doing all the outcome measures and participating in surveys. Will you be analyzing and utilizing this data in the full package? Will it be included in the ESSENCE data for the for consideration in terms of that being your confirmatory study?
Yes, Pat, Gilmore O'Neill here. Yes, we will be. All data we're collecting in the ESSENCE study will be used to support the functional benefits and will be analyzed in support of the
slide 62, 69, boarding at this time. 18.
Thank you. And the cardiac and pulmonary data will be also included. I know we, at this moment, have no validated cardiac endpoints, but clearly to improve heart function and making sure these young men can breathe and their heart beats for a long time is important data for us. And now that you're collecting it, will it be a part of your package, or at least will you share it with the community so that we understand what's happening to the heart?
Yes, Pat, when we have completed the study, we will be analyzing all the outcomes we're collecting. We believe that it's important when collecting data to, commit to analyzing it and to publishing it simply because there is so much effort exerted by all the participants in the studies. And so we owe that to them and to the community to analyze and publish that data upon completion of the study.
Yeah, thank you, Gilmore. Clearly, it's very difficult for us as a community, as you know, to understand this and to interpret it, especially in a letter that the FDA suggests that the benefit risk isn't there when they're only looking at apparent risk in terms of renal toxicity and potential port infections, and they have no efficacy data to say that doesn't really match up to the efficacy. Do you know what I mean? The benefit risk equation is off. Because in our preference studies that we've conducted over time, we know that patients are willing to take on considerable risk for benefit. So the CRL letter really talking about risk and without data on benefit seems a little bit hard to understand and accept from our point of view.
We do intend, when we engage with the agency, to discuss some of that data, including data that PPMD has generated on the willingness of patients and families to accept risk associated with therapies.
Yeah, so we would certainly like to learn more about that. We talked about the contingency plans and you'll continue the current trials. The ESSENCE trial will be used as a confirmatory study, and you'll consider studies in non-ambulatory boys. Can you tell us about the participants? Are they allowed, or will there be a PPMO study that they could switch to, and how do you see that going forward?
Pat, our current commitment is to moving forward aggressively, in fact, ever more aggressively with the ESSENCE study, because while we will obviously aspire to achieving an accelerated approval, that urgency to getting approval for the medicine remains, even if the timeline is longer than that allowed by accelerated approval, or beyond accelerated approval. So we are committed to continuing to execute on the ESSENCE study. And obviously we are talking to all the sites and obviously talking with you to demonstrate our complete commitment to continuing that study. I think PPMO is a separate issue, and the accelerated, the complete response letter does not impact the ESSENCE study, our commitment to it, or the meaningfulness of its design.
Okay, thanks for that. And I know you're seeking an appointment in another meeting with the FDA. Do you have any sense, Gilmore or Doug, about a timeline for that meeting? Is this several months off, several weeks off, and how do you see the best case scenario rolling out here, or the worst case scenario?
Well, so it's very hard to scenario plan in advance of talking to the agency. I can tell you that we will seek a formal meeting with the agency. We should be able to get that on calendar in the next 60 days. We'll formally seek that meeting in the next week or so. So we should have at least an initial formal communication with the agency in the next 60 days or so and go from there. And then it's very, very difficult to predict in advance what the pathway will be. I think we'll have to wait until we have that meeting to get better clarity on next steps.
Yes.
And do you have any examples to provide some insight into once a meeting occurs, what the resolution is, or do you have is there an appeals process? What do you see as the process, or is it highly variable depending on the compound and the division and so on?
There are a number of different potential pathways. There is a pathway in which one could come up with a risk mitigation plan that would satisfy the agency, and then that would be subject to, potentially a resubmission and a rapid review, and you could envision a fairly expeditious conclusion to this. You could envision a longer submission and review cycle. There are one of two potential cycles. One is a 2-month review cycle. One actually has a longer 6-month review cycle, neither of which we know about yet until we talk to them. There is an appeal process right now. As it stands right now, our primary goal is to engage with the agency and the division to better understand their concerns and hopefully to the fullest extent possible address those concerns to their satisfaction. To us, that would appear currently to be the most expeditious path to getting this therapy to the community that's waiting for it.
Thank you. And can you just give us the path you're taking in the EU with EMA and where that lies in the progress?
So the EMA has a different process and a different standard than we have in the United States. So unfortunately for our community in Europe, the concept of an accelerated approval pathway founded on a biomarker isn't present. So ESSENCE would form the basis of that pathway in Europe. So while this has an effect on families in the United States, it doesn't have an effect on Europe only because we couldn't have anticipated an accelerated approval in Europe. We'll have to await the outcome of ESSENCE as a predicate to our European approval.
But are you seeking conditional approval in Europe?
Conditional approval could only come if we had some functional data. So I think, as it stands right now, unless we change the protocol to do an interim analysis, we would still have to await the outcome of ESSENCE as a predicate.
And that's and that's 2024, the outcome of ESSENCE. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And and now I'm going to just read some of the questions that have been submitted to us. Do you plan to abandon golodirsen and the casimersen programs and rely on your gene therapy program, which would reach a larger Duchenne population than those two combined programs? And the assumption is that it could be approved sooner in the FDA than before the confirmatory ESSENCE trial will be completed.
Yeah, we have no plans on abandoning Vyondys or casimersen, our PMOs, or our PPMO, which is our next generation version of the PMOs. We're very excited about our gene therapy program, and we're moving with all speed there. But we equally believe that our PMO technology provides benefits to patients, as we can see with our Exondys therapy that's in the community now, and we are very, very supportive of this. So we stand resolute that we're going to continue to pursue Vyondys and casimersen, the PPMO, and Exondys or eteplirsen wherever we can as well.
Okay, and obviously you can imagine the community, there's about 300 people online today and many more who will be listening to this later, are asking the question, what can we do? Are there things that you think this community could do that would be supportive, that would help accelerate an approval here, to use the word accelerate in the accelerated approval, but what is it that you would recommend for this community to do? We're not very good, as you know, at sitting and waiting.
Let me say this, while, we feel an enormous obligation to this community, and while we appreciate opportunities like this to communicate with the community, we also want you to know that we understand that the obligation is ours. So we are going to win the day with accelerated approval to the extent that we can in a science-based way, satisfy the concerns that the agency has and get this accelerated approval pathway back on track. So it really is our responsibility. It is not earnestly your responsibility. And so while I understand there's a very action-oriented community. As it stands right now, the obligation is ours to actually build the best case, to fully understand, first and foremost, the concerns of the agency so that we can properly address them, to come up with a plan that addresses the agency's concern as rapidly as possible, and then, if possible, after that, to get this therapy out to the families that are waiting for it and to support the therapy in the community. So it's our job to do right to win.
Okay. Thank you. And another question, while I'm worried and saddened about the 8% of patients who will benefit from golodirsen's approval, I'm worrying if this negative news and subsequent market's reaction will have an impact on other therapies in your pipeline, and particularly gene therapy.
So, let me linger for a moment on one additional therapy that we have to think about, which is casimersen. So our goal was to submit very soon for the next PMO that we have, which is casimersen, which is designed to treat those patients who are exon 45 amenable. There may be a difference between casimersen and golodirsen or Vyondys. We don't know yet. We need to talk to the agency, and then we'll decide what the pathway is for casimersen as well. So that will have to await our discussion with the agency. This does not have any impact whatsoever on our microdystrophin gene therapy program for hosts of reasons. First of all, we are not seeking an accelerated approval for our microdystrophin program. In fact, we are currently engaged in a placebo-controlled blinded trial, and our next trial, which will be on our commercial supply material, will also be a placebo-controlled blinded trial. So, and it's also with a different division, I should note. It's with a division that's called CBER. This is a different division, CEDAR. So, this really has no impact on our approach to gene therapy. It might have an impact on the approach that we take to casimersen, but we won't know that until we sit down with the division and better understand the concerns that they are raising.
All right. Thank you for that. In retrospect, the FDA's decision not to hold an AdCom seems to have been intended to block any participation by patients or advocates. Do you view this as a step back in the movement of giving patients their voice and in the drug approval process, and what could be done to ensure that patients and advocates have a voice in the future?
Well, I do want to reiterate something, and that is from the very first discussion that we've had with the division on Vyondys, at the time known as golodirsen, back in February of 2018, we have had a very productive relationship with the division, and actually a very good relationship, which might sound ironic given that we had a CRL on Monday, but we did. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I truly believe that the reason the division chose not to hold an advisory committee meeting on this therapy was because, as they had signaled from the earliest discussions, they had envisioned that so long as the review went well, and it did, that we would obtain an approval, and that there would have been no need for an advisory committee meeting. That may seem ironic now because we got a CRL on Monday, but I do believe that was the reason that the division was motivated not to hold an advisory committee on this. So I would not read this decision as meaning the agency is uninterested in hearing the voice of the patient. I don't believe that we should misread that.
Thank you. I hope not. We've worked really hard to raise our voice, and we think it's a critical voice, after all. Who can speak better to this disease than the people who have it? Again, I'm going to come back to the CRL, and we understand the current statutes and the communications between you and the FDA are confidential. At the same time, all of these patients online and many more suffered, right? Blood, sweat, tears, tissue, outcome measures, burden of travel, and we just really urge you to think about being transparent with the CRL. We learn from them. We think about them, and you can imagine we're thinking about this one 24/7. And so I think as a company, to lead the way, you've led the way in many regards. To think about being transparent with the CRL would be useful to our community.
I hear that. We'll reflect on that. Let me really try to be direct about the CRL. One of the things that we have an obligation to this community to try, if at all possible, to move this therapy along as fast as possible and to bring it to this community. And to do that, we must maintain a positive, productive relationship with the agency. And so I'll be honest, the decisions we make have to consider our regulatory body and being respectful of them. And I fear that if we start releasing otherwise confidential documents, and it might look like we're not being as respectful as it is our intention to be with the agency. And so it really is in service to the community, for instance, that we're not, we wouldn't typically provide access to a confidential letter that was written by the agency to us that I imagine the agency assumed would remain confidential. I can tell you, and I suppose you'll just have to trust me, that the basis for the CRL is paraphrased, though it may be, what the way I've said it. It is exactly as I've said. The agency has determined at this point that the risk-benefit is not there because of the two risk items, and it is the use of ports and infection-related risk that exists associated with ports, and preclinical data from a mouse model regarding potential theoretical risks for renal toxicity. There were no additional risks that were posed in the letter, and that is the basis for it. And I will also tell you the reason that we need to have additional dialogue with the division is that these are not issues that were vetted with the division or raised by the division during the review itself. So we do need to understand better what the division is thinking and the agency is thinking. Yeah. Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry.
All right. I don't disagree with you. If there's been no SAEs on renal tox or even any indications in urine creatinine or anything else that you have some concerns with renal, it seems like looking back to mouse models or other animal models that have dramatically increased doses seems difficult for our community to understand, especially in light of our preference studies. And the port issue is really a struggle for all of us because ports are used in many indications across many therapies, to include the Pompeii folks with their protein replacement therapy across to the oncology division. So I think the port issue was sort of a practical remedy that was pursued by our families to really address some of the burden of the trial in terms of these young guys trying to be stuck 7 to 10 times just to get into a vessel. So we find that, and we would certainly be supportive of that discussion with you and the FDA. This is something that we think, in terms of benefit risk, the benefit of having a port is significant. The risk of infection is always going to be there, but our families are very attentive to risk and the infection possibilities of a port. So I personally don't think that's a great argument for the FDA.
I understand why you're puzzled. We will meet with the agency, get a better understanding of what their perspective is. Hopefully, frankly, given the perspective you raised, which is not dissimilar to the perspective we would have on many of these issues, hopefully there is an avenue where we can address these issues, address them to the satisfaction of the agency, and get this accelerated approval pathway back on track. But we can't promise that until we've met with the agency and better understand their concerns.
Right, I completely get it. And I'm going to go back to the outcomes as well, Doug. Their primary outcome in the essence, the single primary outcome in the essence is terrific, and we all agree with that. But I think what we really look is the sort of the comprehensive view of these young men, not just the walking ability, because I think no parent or no probably young man with Duchenne really cares about walking for a certain distance that you are walking and can move from room to room. But it's also the energy levels of these young men, the ability to climb stairs, the ability to get off the floor. It's sort of this comprehensive package, and certainly for non-ambulatory patients to keep their arm function with the pull in terms of an outcome measure and cardiac and pulmonary assessments. So I'm wondering, in terms of your data package at the end of Essence, is all of this going to be included so the FDA can really recognize the completeness, if you will, of the benefit of these kinds of therapies, such as exon skipping therapies?
Pat, this is Gilmore here. You raised critical issues here. Yes, the answer is. The evolution of drug development over the last decade or so has been about moving beyond just simple clinical outcomes, kind of with that sort of functional and day-to-day living. So that's why there is actually a comprehensive collection of such data to enable us to give a very deep understanding of the impact of the medicine, golodirsen or Vyondys, on completion of the Essence trial to support approval and, frankly, access beyond approval.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gilmore. I just think, in our experience with Exondys 51, the primary failed, as you know, at the conclusion of the study. But then 4 years later, we're looking at children who are doing far differently than the natural history predicted they would do. And I think that's always a concern of our community. Are you looking comprehensively? Are you looking long enough? Because it seems as the biology of our bodies change with the expression of dystrophin, then it might take some time for that sort of return to health biologically of the muscles to be able to demonstrate benefit. And so what we don't want to do is miss out on a therapy because it is a very short-term and narrow look.
Yeah. So we are. So as you know, there is a quite prolonged follow-up in Essence. And you must know also that, of course, you are very well aware, as are the families and the boys and young men who are in the study, that there is an extension. So we are collecting that data out into the long term. And this is based on important lessons learned in previous programs about the importance of collecting long-term data to pick up precisely those observations that you are communicating, Pat, about alternative long-term benefits and stabilization. And
Gilmore, in your interactions with FDA over time, do you believe that, we'll just speak to the neurology division, I know you're working with CBER as well in your gene therapy, but do you think that they're getting a much better and more complete picture of the progression of Duchenne its impact not only on the individual with the disease, but on the caregiving aspect and certainly on the burden of quality of life. Are they seeing this complete picture, and is that a viable discussion as you seek approval for Vyondys?
I actually strongly believe that yes, that they do understand. These are the division of the neurology division in CDER contains many highly committed physician scientists who are neurologists, who have practiced neurology and understand the burden of disease, but more importantly, seek that information. And frankly, we are communicating and sharing a lot of that information with them, and will continue to do so. And that will actually also, that information is not just part of our ongoing communications, but will actually be a substantial part of our submissions.
Great. And as you have a meeting with FDA, do you suppose part of that meeting will be the commitment to ongoing studies beyond Essence?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, there are two things about our commitment. I think the first thing I hope that you can all see is how incredibly committed Sarepta is to finding therapies, not a therapy, but therapies for all patients with Duchenne. I think the other point about our commitment is that we are deeply committed to executing the necessary trials that the agencies require for them to be able to give approvals.
Thank you. And I think then there's other questions that have been submitted about combinations. For instance, a combination of an exon skipping drug such as Vyondys and a gene therapy approach. Can you just make a comment on that possibility and how you see, or do you see that as a future possibility?
So this is Doug. So, it is an interesting hypothesis. One of the reasons, there's a lot of reasons why we're pursuing all of these therapies at the same time. The overarching reason for all of it is that we are taking as many shots on goal to benefit patients as is possible. There is literature that already exists, for instance, that pre-treating with a PMO in advance of gene therapy potentially enhances the expression in gene therapy. So we know already, at least in preclinical models, there's good reason to believe that the use of a PMO, an exon skipping therapy, followed by gene therapy would itself be a benefit. There's also a hypothesis that post-gene therapy there might be a continuing role for an exon skipping therapy like a Vyondys or Exondys or Casimersen. That's going to require more work from us to figure that out. We're going to have to do additional work. We're actually doing that now. We actually have a collaboration, an academic collaboration, to continue to look at that. So that is something we're going to have to look at over time to see if that's the case. I will also say that if it turns out that the day comes and that gene therapy is so profound and transformative that there is no role for additional therapies, I make no prediction about that. But if that were the case, and then great, we will frankly pop champagne for that day as well. We'll be thrilled with that. So we're going to let the therapies take us in the direction that the science takes us. But as it stands right now, we're pursuing our PMOs, we're pursuing PPMOs, we're pursuing gene therapy, and we are pursuing at least the science behind the combination of some of these therapies and whether we get an additive benefit for patients.
Great. Thank you for that. Now, just specifically about the patients that are currently in these studies, have you informed all of the clinical sites so that, the worst case scenario would be if a patient had a question about the CRL or about the next steps or about their participation in the current study and what that means and and any other clinical questions. Have you had conversations with the clinical sites to inform them of the CRL, your next steps, what their next steps are, and what they can expect?
Yes, Pat. In fact, as soon as we received the complete response letter, we actually started to work to engage with all the sites. We have set up a number of WebExes with the sites, essentially to give people around the world, because this is a global study, choices of times that are convenient for them to engage. And these will be occurring this week, actually this week. So we think that's very important. And again, the other thing we obviously want to be sure is, and this is part of it, is to engage with you and the community to understand a number of things. First of all, our commitment to continuing ESSENCE. I think also, very importantly, to share the importance of continuing ESSENCE and the need for us all to lean in to help support and keep that study moving forward, because it is critical to the ultimate generation of data to support the approval of golodirsen. And so in that way, we are making sure that we interact with all the sites, the investigators, and with the community.
Right, and I know we're not talking about other exons coming forward, but does this CRL negatively impact any of your plans to bring up the other exons, the 50s, 44s, exon 8, et cetera, in your pipeline? Does it change the timeline for those to be introduced into clinical trials?
No, it doesn't. We are not going to change our approach. We are still very committed to our PMO platform and our PPMO platform. We have we have a PPMO right now, PPMO 5051, which is in a multi-ascending dose trial right now. It'll get a readout next year. We have 6 therapies that could either be PMOs or PPMOs that could serve as many as over 40% of the Duchenne community, and we are very committed to that. One of the things we want to see, just to look around the corner, unrelated to this, one of the things we want to see is the outcome of that PPMO multi-ascending dose, and then we can make some good decisions about whether we create additional PMOs or whether we're switching to the PPMO for some of these next generation therapies, and we'll know that early next year. But to reiterate, we are completely committed to our RNA platform because we do believe it brings an enormous amount of value to the community.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both, Gilmore. Thank you all, Siobhan, Gilmore, and Doug. I'd like one final question, then I'm going to ask each of you to sort of make a closing statement, because we just have about 9 more minutes according to my computer. One of the things that I'd like to ask you to commit to is, once you meet with the FDA and you have a conversation about next steps, I hope you'll be willing to come in another conversation with the community to update them about your interactions, and recognizing that some of them may be really confidential, but at least to keep us informed. I think that I can say to you, having had 2 sons with Duchenne and following their trajectory, I always was looking for bad news because I didn't have much good news. And I think the CRL is one of those other times when we felt another shoe drop and worry about how many other shoes will drop in our lives before we see these boys treated. So I hope you'll commit to another conversation once you have had an interaction with the FDA and have plans to go forward and again, what we might do as a community to help support these efforts to get an approval.
Yeah, so we're clear, Pat. We are completely committed to transparency, and we will keep the community up to date as we proceed. If we have a meeting with the agency and we don't immediately communicate the outcome of it, it will only be because we don't want to mislead. You know this, Pat, because I think I've had direct conversations with you when we've been out at PPMD. One of the things we always want to make sure that we don't do is we don't speak so excitedly about programs that we provide, misstatements to people out of our exuberance for our program. So, but when we have meetings with the agency and we understand where we're going and we have sufficient clarity that I'm confident that we wouldn't be misleading people, I will give you my absolute assurance that we will hold either a newsletter or we'll hold another conference call or webinar like this to ensure that we're continuing to provide updates to the community along the way. We exist for one purpose, and that is to serve this community. This week was extraordinarily painful to all of the folks at Sarepta who worked so tirelessly on this therapy, but I am well aware that it's not time for us to wallow in, disappointment, because as disappointing as it is for this group, it is far, far, far more impactful to the community of patients and their families who are waiting for therapies and frankly don't have time to wait. So we will work like mad, Pat, and the community, and we will keep you apprised as accurately as we can along the way. I absolutely commit that to you and to the rest of the community.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to an update from you, at least, that things are progressing, just sort of a high sign at least, if not real information about what the plans are going forward. And certainly I think you and your team know that we're interested in therapies, all of them. If we had a magic wand, we'd wave them all forward so that we could have access and experience in a real life setting. So I do thank you. And Gilmore, if you'll have a few last comments and then we'll wrap up. And we do deeply appreciate your time today.
All right. Okay, excellent.
Gilmore, any last thoughts?
So let me say is that there are no last thoughts on this. There are only future thoughts. And the key thing is that, as Doug says, I can't even begin to imagine how disappointing this is for you and the urgency that you all feel about getting therapies for this condition. We are going to work extraordinarily hard to actually move as fast as we can to find a path forward for Vyondys, and we are also going to maintain a laser focus on developing all the other therapeutics that we have in the portfolio to help patients and with Duchenne, battling with Duchenne. And I think the key thing and the most important thing to remember is that the ESSENCE study, right specifically to Vyondys, is the ESSENCE study is the core, is at the very core of our plan to get its approval. And it's really critical that we maintain a focus on supporting this study, and that's what we're going to do. And I really want to thank you, too, for taking time to ask us questions, to send us questions, and to engage in this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for joining us. We know that this wasn't an easy conversation. We're thankful for the conversation. We're a community that is very supportive and very engaged and obviously very anxious to have therapies for the people that we love. So thank you again for joining us. We'll look forward to an update from you as soon as possible. And as you know, in our hearts, that's tomorrow, and we'll wait to hear from you. But again, thank you. And to the community that joined us today and the community that will listen to this following, we and I am deeply grateful to be part of this community. Being in the trenches with you makes all the difference in the world. Thank you for joining us, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.